Couple questions for me. If organics is a big market with low merit, is grass-fed cows just hype too? There's actually a lot of good evidence that says that grass-fed cows have a better, grass-fed steers for probably if we're going to eat them, have a better omega 6 to 3 ratio. We want omega-3s up and 6s down. And so the more grass you feed them, the more natural diet, the 3s go up, that ratio actually goes down, and theoretically it should be healthier for you. And I think there's a lot of benefit for grass-fed. I think most of us who work in the cattle industry would like to see cows out in pasture. The big problem, and that can happen in the dairy industry, and it does happen in the dairy industry very often. The big problem with the beef industry, and we were just talking about this last night in Chicago as well, is we simply do not have enough pasture land in this country to raise the beef required. 38 million head of cattle are slaughtered every year for beef, 38 million, to feed 312 million people. We simply don't have enough pasture land. I've done the math. It takes about a half an hour, but all through the Agricultural Research Service and USDA, all that data is available. What pasture land is available, how many cows it will support, or steers it will support per acre. And so you get out in Western Rangelands, Nevada, where it looks like a post-nuclear test site, than it was. You might have 300 acres to support one steer, whereas in Northwest Illinois or Eastern Indiana or Southern Kentucky, you can have one cow-calf pair on 1 acre. So you put all those things together, and we simply don't have enough acreage to support grass-fed. But there's certainly something to it. Yeah, and I think we may have maybe given a little bit of the wrong impression. I don't think any of us at the College of Veterinary Medicine are anti-organic. It's just that you have to know what you're paying for. There's some benefits, and because of the USDA certification program, it implies that there is some potentially sustainability in the production of those products, and who can't support that? But not always. So you have to look behind. You have to look behind the story. Back to Dan. What's the environmental impact of marijuana?
Well, it's a tricky question. We were talking about this on the radio earlier today. Because cannabis is still illegal federally, even in states where it is allowed for medical purposes, and because it is such a widely consumed substance, even though it is illegal, and given the nature of our asset forfeiture laws, which are laws that allow the government to seize private property from individuals suspected of acquiring that property through illegal means, we found, and it's been more common, where people are growing cannabis illegally on public lands, and they're doing so in an environmentally degrading fashion because they don't care if they're polluting, or if they don't care if they're using synthetic fertilizers that are going to be washed downstream type of situation. But it's because of that illegality of the substance and the fact that people aren't going to grow this on their own land because the property will get seized, that we've shifted it to our national forests and places like that. Now, the positive aspect of if we were to end cannabis prohibition, which would then allow us to also grow industrial hemp, which we're the only industrial country that doesn't allow the farming of industrial hemp, even though consumer-based hemp products are still legal in this country. When we used to grow industrial hemp significantly in this country, that could have a real lasting impact, especially for states like Illinois that are so agricultural based, because industrial hemp doesn't require the nitrogen levels that corn or soybean and that crop rotation require, because when you grow corn, it depletes the land of nitrogen. You put a legume in there like soybean and it replaces some of it. If you were to add industrial hemp into that crop rotation, you could significantly help with the aeration of the soil, removing of heavy metals within the soil, as well as just allowing farmers to get away from the synthetic fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides that really financially have them where it counts. So I would think that the environmental impact is both a negative resulting from the prohibition of cannabis, where you have people growing it in nefarious manners in our state and public lands because it is illegal and because of the asset forfeitures. But if we were to take it out of the illegal sector and bring it above ground and have a legal market, those people could grow it in fashions that we generally have in regulations for other large-scale agricultural commodities. and people would be doing it on their own private land instead of in state and national forests.
So is it true that it is still illegal in Illinois to do research at universities on rope hemp?
I mean, you can buy the raw materials and do research on the rope itself, but as soon as you plant that seed or try and grow that crop, it is illegal. They have done studies of economic viability in the state of Illinois, but my understanding of the way that the Cannabis Control Act is written is that even universities that want to engage in research, they need to go through certain protocols to get granted permission to do that research. And as far as I know, none of the universities in Illinois are doing any of that
And
research.
so those permissions would have to go through the state legislature?
They would have to go through, I don't think it's the state legislature, I think it would be the state, I think it would be the Department of Human Services, ironically. And then they wouldn't write those recommendations, they would fall back on the federalist policy of it being illegal completely. Because at this point, there's already, I think, 6 or 7 states that have passed legislation saying they want their farmers in their states to be able to grow industrial hemp. It's just that the federal government comes in and shuts it down every time they try to. North Dakota had a wonderful example of where they tried to grow industrial hemp. It was a state lawmaker who sponsored the bill. He was a farmer, he wanted to grow it, and he even did an act of civil disobedience where he did go and plant it and then suffered whatever penalties the feds were there to do it. I mean, they made a big press conference and media event out of it. But it's one of those tragedies of our prohibition on cannabis that we don't allow farmers to grow industrial hemp in this country, especially because it doesn't have any psychoactive potential. It's very useful for fiber and cordage, the oil as far as a biodiesel, and a nutritional product. That would be another aspect of the human cost of it. You were talking about omega-3s and omega-6s. The cannabis seed is one of the most nutritional seeds that's out there because it has a balanced ratio of omega-3s and omega-6 fatty acids, which are beneficial for brain development and other things. But the actual industrial hemp variety of cannabis is an extremely valuable agricultural commodity. And the fact that we can buy consumer-based goods, you can buy hemp milk, you can buy shelled hemp seed. I have a hemp wallet. I know people that have hemp suits. I have a couple hemp t-shirts and socks. But all of those raw materials for that are grown and produced in other countries, mostly Canada and China. And it's nothing short of tragic, especially with Illinois, how we're such an agricultural-based state. And I could talk for 2 hours on just the agricultural impact of prohibition on industrial hemp, but I don't want to try and take up too much more of this time. But if you want to find out more about industrial hemp in Illinois, a colleague of mine did a real good 15-minute documentary about a hemp museum in Polo, Illinois. And the documentary is called Government Grown: How Polo Helped Win the War. And it's a small little museum in this rinky-dink town that celebrates the region's patriotism by growing industrial hemp, and they had a processing mill there during the World War II Hemp for Victory campaign. So I'll close the question with that plug for that documentary.
Polo's a pretty little town in northwest Illinois, that way. So there is absolutely, just to clarify, there is absolutely no way that anybody could smoke rope hemp and get any kind of buzz at all.
The THC levels in what is generally considered to be industrial hemp is 0.3%. To give you a kind of a comparison, what they used to be smoking in the 60s and 70s, they would say was somewhere between 6 and 7% THC. Some of the more potent strains and varieties of cannabis now are in the upper teens or lower 20s for a percent of THC. So that 0.3% is it's a negligible amount. I mean,
you can smoke a lot, and all you're going to get is a headache, right?
You're closer off having a toxic reaction due to the carbon monoxide from the combustion of all that plant material.
Question for me, can you think of a reason that a doctor would prescribe organic milk for a patient, particularly a young child? No. In a word, we have an issue that, you know, things cycle. You know, we forgot that pasteurization was created to save us from brucellosis and tuberculosis and later Campylobacter, Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli, Shigella, blah, 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 all these other diseases. And in the last, 10, 15 years, probably, maybe a little bit longer than that, we've been getting into the raw milk deal where people want to drink a lot more raw milk. Now, my wife grew up on a dairy farm when we were dating in college. You know, I'd go out there and I'd slam down some raw milk. I knew the cows, it was clean. Didn't really like it because it was about 4.2% butter fat, and whole milk is 3.5, and it tasted like taking a bite out of a stick of butter. You know, it was thick. It had a lot of substance to it. But we have this issue, not organic, but people prescribing raw milk for kids because they think that somehow pasteurization ruins the milk. And that's one of the topics of our third session coming up, whenever the date was that I couldn't read in April. And so I don't want to spill the beans on that, but that's one of the topics we'll be covering in that third session about raw diets. Another question about environmental impact on plastics, especially plastics in the marine environment. And I showed that picture of the Anacostia River. You guys know about this, I don't know how many, what is it,
Size of
miles
Texas.
across out in the South Pacific?
Every ocean.
Yeah, you guys know a lot more about it than I do. But a friend of mine actually, he's retired, and he signed on to be a steamer. This is Jim Floyd. He's a retired colonel, a West Point colonel. He's a veterinarian, a thermogenologist like I am. So he's retired. He's a funny guy, an interesting guy. But anyways, he signed up to be a steamer crew person going from New Zealand to LA. This is 2 years ago. And he actually saw this thing from a distance. I don't think they were real close to it. But there's this big circulating pool of plastics out in the South Pacific, I guess. And, eventually plastics break down. They're petroleum based, and it's not all good stuff that breaks down. And so you gotta figure that it can't be good. And then you always see these pictures of, ring tops off of milk bottles and six-pack, those plastic things that hold six packs together, and ducks having their feet caught in them, and chickens, or not chickens, but birds with their, I don't know what chickens are doing now. Well, free range chickens, right? Chickens with their heads stuck in. So, yeah, we've got a lot of garbage out there. There's no doubt about it. And then the last question in the series on environmental impact was organic versus conventional dairies. And we actually we started to do a study on this about 4 years ago. We were looking at the carbon footprint of conventional dairies versus large conventional dairies, small conventional dairies, Amish dairies, and then organic dairies. And we were just getting this project going. We got funded. It was only $10,000. Right when we got going, the University of Arkansas, some center down at the University of Arkansas, publishes this whole series of research doing exactly what we were proposed to do. So they kind of put us out of the water. It made us irrelevant. And the interesting thing is, the carbon footprint question is it better to have one 10,000 cow dairy or 100 cow dairies from an environmental standpoint, from a carbon footprint standpoint? And so that was basically the question they asked at that University of Arkansas center. And as it turns out, when you do all the calculus, and their assumptions were pretty good, I think. As much as I hate to admit it, it's probably better to have the 10,000 cow dairy from a carbon footprint standpoint, because everything is localized, you can control, and there's not redundancy in production. If you're looking at X number of million or billion of pounds of milk produced, the carbon footprint required to get to that point is significantly less than having 100 dispersed dairies. So anyways, not that I really enjoy working on smaller dairies, a lot more than I do on big dairies, but oh well. Are there any studies showing effects of cannabinoids on women who are pregnant?
Yes. There was a study that looked at Jamaican women who were using cannabis during pregnancy. I believe the University of Iowa also did a study looking at it. And from what I gathered from it, I didn't investigate or research it that much, it didn't have any detrimental effect on the fetus development and production. As far as how cannabinoids are related to a successful pregnancy, that's something that a few colleagues and I have done research on with the different studies showing that in order for the fertilized egg to attach itself to the uterus wall, cannabinoids can play a significant role in that activity because the human body and all mammals have an endocannabinoid system that regulates other bodily systems, the nervous systems, cardiovascular systems. And even if you don't consume cannabinoids, herbal cannabinoids, or synthetic cannabinoids, the body can still produce its own endocannabinoids and some of those cannabinoids are what are extremely important for that fertilized egg to attach itself to the uterus wall. But for the question of women who are pregnant, I wouldn't recommend women who are pregnant smoking anything. That's my own personal belief. From a professional standpoint, I would also say I don't recommend pregnant women smoking anything. Do I think that it could be beneficial for them to help have a successful pregnancy if they are using cannabinoids to potentially treat things like morning sickness or mood swings? I think that could be a very beneficial thing for pregnant women to consume cannabis. But again, I would say that you could use other means of administration besides smoking to get some of those possible benefits.
A similar question for Weiss, is it okay for pregnant women to get flu vaccinations?
Yes, it's not just okay, it's actually recommended for pregnant women to take the flu vaccine, because getting the flu during pregnancy can be detrimental to the mother as well as the child, and so it is highly recommended for mothers to take this during pregnancy.
Again, a point to reiterate, and we do this all the time, a flu virus vaccine is not only a killed virus, it's a part of a killed virus. And it can't replicate it, it can't recrudesce in the body. So when you hear people say, oh, I never get the flu shot anymore, I got it one time and I got so sick, blah, blah, blah. It was something else. It wasn't a killed virus vaccine. Dan, I don't know if I understand this question completely, but what happens when you harvest a legal number of plants and yield an illegal quantity?
Well, in the state of Illinois, there are no legal quantities of plants. In states that do allow for patients to cultivate their own medicine, they generally have a plant limit that is enacted, and then they also have a amount of usable medicine that patients are allowed to have in any given amount of time. So it's generally a 2-week period, how much medicine they're allowed to have. And that's one of those things where the government isn't in there regulating every single medical cannabis patient's garden in states that allow patients to cultivate. And a lot more states, when they pass medical cannabis programs, are not allowing patients to cultivate their own medicine because of problems with some of that medicine being diverted to the illegal sector.
Got a lot of really great questions. This is one for me, and I don't have an answer to it. It says, I heard that Champaign County has some of the best rated water in the U.S. Due to the Muhammad Aquifer, which is probably true. Testing moved from Champaign to the state labs in Springfield, and I now notice a difference in the taste. Do you know anything about this? I have no idea. I don't know why the water case would change just because whoever is doing the testing has changed, so I don't know about that one. BPA replaced or other phased out more toxic chemicals for plastic now that it's being phased out. Don't know that it's being phased out, but what studies have been conducted to look at alternatives, and are they safe? Alternatives for plastic, and are they safe? And I'll call on Dr. Veal on this too. Maybe I'll just throw it over to Mike. What's the regulatory mechanism for getting plastics on the market? Is it just does it fall to consumer groups to prove that there's a problem with
Consumer product agents have to prove anything, but I don't know of any plastics or any substance that's being proposed to replace them that I'm aware of. I mean, it's not my area of expertise. The concern that's coming out, and what Jody's showing too, is with BPA, there may be what's called a hormetic response, where you have at the low to high dose levels, you got a normal dose response, and then at high dose you get a response. When you get down to lower dose levels, there's no response. But then when you get to lower dose levels, there starts to be a response again. It's a U-shaped curve. And that's where the concern is, or maybe these trace levels that people are being exposed to causing some low-level effects.
We have this pretty constant battle with getting consumer products on board, especially ones that potentially could be toxic. We have consumer groups who want to invoke the precautionary principle, which would put the responsibility of proving toxicity to the manufacturer before it's allowed on the market. Whereas the manufacturers say, trust us, it's safe, it's up to you to prove that it's detrimental. And so we have this, this battle going on for the last 50 years. So we'll see who's going to win. Do you have any information regarding pesticides in milk and oils? as residue from defatting process, mass production process, much like decaffeinating coffee. I don't. Pesticides in milk are checked, but not checked as much as antibiotics. Antibiotics were the big thing. You know, that has been the big thing that we've been looking at in milk for a long time. That's checked, as I said, 3-4 times every load of milk that goes to market. Pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, all that stuff is spot checked, and usually at the silo level. You know, these are big silos full of milk. So not as many tests, and generally, you know, we're finding pesticides, herbicides, personal care products in everything. It's a matter of whether those levels are important or not. When we go out, not to the Jardine water treatment plant, but to the Metropolitan water treatment plant, which is wastewater in Stickney, Illinois, largest one in the world, by the way. The water that comes out of there is really pretty clean looking, but it goes into the sanitary and ship canal and then into the Splains River eventually. And the tests that have been done on that north part of the Splains River, the outflow from the sanitary ship canal, there's progesterone, there's estrogen, there's Prozac, there's Zoloft, there's antibiotics, there's antihistamines, there's everything imaginable in that water. So I wouldn't be surprised that we're finding it in milk, meat, vegetables, and we know that it's in vegetables. It's incorporated right, and you can't wash it off, it's incorporated right into the vegetable. But is that significant or not? That's the big question, and we don't have the answer to that. Is it significant? All right, just the last couple of questions. How would medical marijuana work in Illinois? I mean, would there be stores? I've heard that it's a mess in California and other states that have.
That's what they're really debating right now. We were hoping to get a vote in early January before the new lawmakers were sworn in. That didn't happen. And for what it's worth, at this point, the issue of medical cannabis in Illinois isn't so much of a, is this medicine or is this not medicine, or should we do this or should we not do this? Like all politics, it's now just down to the vested business interests. You have people who want to open up shops. You have people who want to grow the medicine for those shops, and they're getting together with the politicians, you know, this month and into next month to discuss mostly just limiting the licenses for how many places there would be statewide that would be growing the medicine, as well as for the nonprofit dispensaries that would be dispensing the medicine to the patients. And from those business standpoints, what they're looking to do is to limit the amount of licenses that would be issued across the state so that they could have an increased market share. The way that the bill was written last year was that there would be 59 of these nonprofit dispensaries across the state, one for each state Senate district. What ended up happening was that you had some people who had a lot of money who paid a lobbyist to come and convince the lawmakers that they can have those 59 dispensaries, but you should really only have 1 or 2 or 3 master grow facilities that would provide the medicine for all those 59 dispensaries. And by the way, I'd like to have license number 1. That's the way that politics works. I'm sorry, but that's the game. And what we found was that the patients and advocates like myself had to come in and say, well, while we're happy that you guys are supporting our efforts to get access to this medicine to the patients, you're doing it from just a strictly financial incentive, and if you are going to have only 1 or 2 growing facilities for the entire state, you're going to have a limited amount of varieties of cannabis for the patients, and they're not going to be able to have the choices that they should have if they're looking to choose between the different strains of cannabis, because from a manufacturing standpoint, it's easier to just grow a monoculture type of crop than it is to have 5 or 6 different types of cannabis growing all along by each other. So it's really at this point down to the money, who can make as much as possible, and what the lawmakers are willing to do to shape the legislation so that the implementation can get these people the money that they're looking to make.
How much pushback does who's the legislator who's had this bill for the last 10 years?
In the House, State Representative Lang has been sponsoring it for 5 years now. In the state Senate, it was before he became Senate President, John Cullerton.
Oh.
And 4 years ago, when Lang took over as well, we shifted the sponsorship to State Senator Hayne, who's down in the Belleville area, and he's a former state's attorney.
Do they get any pushback from the prison, from Department of Corrections?
A little bit. I mean, they're always battling with the law enforcement lobbying agencies on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
The Illinois State Police went neutral on it 2 years ago. And that was mostly because the governor was anticipating this bill getting to his desk and because the state police are a branch of the, or an agency of the executive branch, he didn't want to have to sign a bill that his own people, or his own, at least police people, were actively opposed, so he got them to shift from being formally opposed to being neutral. Just this past 2 months, I want to say, I heard that the Illinois Sheriff's Association also went neutral on the bill, but I haven't seen any formal documentation for that shift of formal positioning, because in politics it's just a matter of what the agency says. Because even then, like I said, the law enforcement lobbyists for both of those agencies, they're real good people. I have a lot of excellent conversations with them, even if we are working against each other in a lot of ways. But for what it's worth, I found out, and we as an entity and as an advocacy organization, we found out that the Illinois State Police went neutral on our bill literally in the lunch line at the Capitol, where I was there with a multiple sclerosis patient that I've taken to the Capitol many times. Her and I were in line waiting to get our lunch at the cafeteria, and the state police lobbyist was in front of us, and he turned around and said hello, he knows who we are. And he said, "Oh, by the way, did you know that we went neutral on your bill?" And I was like, "No, I didn't." And he's like, "Yeah, we were real quiet about it. We didn't have a press conference or really announce it to anybody." And I had to sit there and be like, "Okay, let's get my food, and I gotta go call somebody and find out if this is true." And sure enough, it was true. But this was 2 years ago. We thought that would have been enough to get the medical bill through, and it just wasn't. We found other hurdles. Instead of the lawmakers telling us, well, the state police are against it, they'd say, well, the county sheriffs are against it. The chief of police in my town is against it. And those are the law enforcement agencies that have been working against us. Even if they'll sit there and tell you that they don't think that these people should be criminals for having access to this medicine or for using this medicine if their doctor recommends it, it's just that their job is to protect the interests of the Sheriff's Association, or of the Chiefs of Police Association, or of the Fraternal Order of Police, or of the corrections unions. Because that's how big of this prison industrial complex is that you have multiple agencies and they all have their own lobbyists, and that lobbyist's job is to make sure that their budget stays at its current level or expands.
That wraps up the questions. If you have other questions, I think Julie just
Is
went.
public health still going to be who is the regulatory agency for this?
My thought was that it would be the Department of Human Services.
I think it's public health.
I know that a couple of years ago, the bill was going to go through the public health. But at least now, the way the Cannabis Control Act is that the regulation is through the Department of Human Services. That's the current Cannabis Control Act, and the sections 11 and 15 that allow for the doctors to engage in research, that's already on the books. And knowing the head of the Department of Health, the lobbyist, she hasn't really come up to me or talked to us about that much, whereas the Department of Human Services people are engaging us and saying, we got to make sure that our budget is earmarked to be fiscally neutral on this, because we're not going to be able to have the staff to oversee the application process and the regulations of the dispensaries. But for what it's worth, it very well could have been that last year. With the new bill, it's just a shell bill, and they don't have any of the details written, so it could change.
If you have further questions, can you?
I'm more than willing to stay and
Stay
answer
for a while.
questions. If anyone wants to help out, I'm more than willing to give them ways to help out.
Thank you all for coming. It's a great audience. I look forward to seeing you on March 7th, and pass the word around.
There are flyers
There'll
too,
be a-
take a handful.
It'll be a good session on March 7th.
Thank you very much.